Hello everyone. Welcome back to our channel. Autumn 1805, Buffalo Creek, New York. Delegates of the Onodowaga Seneca sit in council while visitors wait by the door. The fire burns low. The interpreter takes his place. A New England minister named Jacob Cram has asked permission to establish a mission among the Seneca. He believes there is one true path to serve the Creator. He carries letters and a plan for schools and worship. The council has heard such requests before. Land has narrowed in living memory. Roads and mills creep closer. Outsiders arrive with good intentions and leave with more than they brought. Sagoyewatha, known in English as Red Jacket, rises to answer. He is not a war leader here. He is a diplomat and an orator trusted to speak for the council. He begins without anger. He calls the visitor brother. He thanks the Great Spirit for a safe meeting. He accepts that the minister believes his message is good. Then he asks a question that will decide the day. If your book contains the whole truth, and if the Creator meant it for every people, why did he not also give our fathers the knowledge to read it in our own way? The room is still. The issue is larger than a sermon. A resident mission would shape schools, marriage, burial, and the authority of elders. It would adjust the clock of daily life to a bell that does not belong to this council. The minister waits for consent. The chiefs wait for a reply that protects order without breaking friendship. This episode follows the road to this meeting and the words spoken in it. It sets the scene from post-war treaties to the pressure around reservations. It explains why a single speech could hold a boundary without violence. The question is direct. What led the Seneca to say no in 1805 at Buffalo Creek, and why did the Oratory of Red Jacket stop a mission then and there? Late 18th century pressures set the stage for Buffalo Creek, New York. After the American Revolution, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy faces loss of towns, fields, and hunting grounds across New York. The Treaty of Fort Stanwix, 1784, narrows territory under United States authority. The Treaty of Canandaigua, 1794, recognizes several Seneca reservations and promises annual goods. Those goods arrive through agents and traders who also open doors to speculation. Survey lines run close to villages. New roads and mills reshape travel and trade. The result is a daily negotiation over land use and jurisdiction. Religion and reform arrive on those same roads. Protestant missionary societies grow along the Atlantic seaboard during the revival seasons of the era. They bring Bibles, primers, and plans for schools. They also bring a conviction that a single path to God should replace older ways. Among the Seneca, a different internal revival rises with the teachings of Handsome Lake, beginning in 1799. His message forbids alcohol, condemns domestic violence, and calls people back to ceremonies, while allowing selective adoption of useful crafts. Two parallel reform currents now press on the same communities. One is external and supervised by ministers. One is internal and supervised by councils and faith keepers. Seneca leaders balance survival and autonomy. Cornplanter maintains diplomatic ties and seeks material aid that does not surrender jurisdiction. Red Jacket grows into the role of public speaker who can manage visitors and set terms. Both understand the arithmetic of loss. Each land cession shortens hunting and reduces seasonal movement. Each new school founded by outsiders risks teaching contempt for elders. The council therefore asks a basic question before any program begins. Who holds authority if conflict emerges? The council or the visitor? United States policy adds weight. Federal officials speak of civilization through agriculture and Christianity. They prefer voluntary missions and model farms instead of military force. They do not always control state land speculators or local zeal. New York state sales and private deals work around treaty promises. The agencies that deliver annuity goods also carry letters of recommendation for teachers. A minister who arrives with one of these letters expects a hearing. He can point to federal language that praises such work. The Seneca can point to treaties that safeguard self-government on reserved land. By 1805, the ground around Buffalo Creek is crowded with examples. Some families accept plows and cattle from reformers. Others resent the tone of outside instruction. Alcohol has damaged households, and councils have acted to restrict it. Handsome Lake's code gains influence and provides an internal program for moral order. Missionaries read this as resistance to truth. Councils read it as care for the nation. When Jacob Cram enters the picture, he does not come as a stranger. He is the latest in a line of visitors who believe a resident mission is the key to improvement. Each side has objectives and constraints. The minister seeks permission to preach, to teach, to gather a congregation, and to build a small station. He is constrained by time, food, money, and by the need for council consent. He travels by road and lives on hospitality while he negotiates. The Seneca Council seeks to preserve peace, trade, and authority. It wants tools, teachers, and doctors only on terms that do not fracture families or undermine councils. It is constrained by shrinking land, a young generation learning English for trade, and the pull of nearby markets. The immediate trigger is procedural. A request to settle as a missionary reaches the council fire at Buffalo Creek. The chiefs agree to hear the proposal. They appoint Red Jacket to answer. His task is not to defeat a man. His task is to restate a boundary that treaties promised and that daily pressures test. The interpreter is present. The visitors are ready. The council prepares to decide whether an outside bell will set the hours of Seneca life. The morning of the council opens with calm ceremony. The fire is fed. The benches are full. The visiting minister, Jacob Cram, stands among men who have fought wars, signed treaties, and buried families lost to disease and drink. He believes he brings help, not harm. His tone is earnest. He explains that he has come in the name of the Great Spirit to teach the only true path of salvation. He says that without this message, the Seneca will live in darkness and be unhappy hereafter. His interpreter moves carefully through the words, shaping their sense into Iroquoian rhythms. The room remains quiet. At Buffalo Creek, silence has weight. It signals that words will be remembered. The minister offers small gifts and speaks of peace. He cites the friendship of the United States government and promises that a mission will bring industry and order. He describes schools for children, lessons in reading, and hymns that join labor to devotion. His speech is polished in the language of reformers from New England. What he cannot feel is the accumulation of memory that fills the room around him. Memories of missionaries who came before, of traders who mixed spirits with persuasion, and of farms lost through agreements signed in haste or mistranslation. When he finishes, the chiefs confer. Smoke curls to the rafters. After a pause, they signal for Red Jacket to reply. He stands slowly, a tall figure in a red coat trimmed with silver, his Medal of Washington resting on his chest. He begins softly acknowledging the visitor as brother, a courtesy that binds the exchange. He thanks the Great Spirit for bringing them together in health. Then his tone shifts. He recounts that when the white men first crossed the sea, the native people welcomed them with kindness, gave them corn, and shared the hunt. In return came steel disease and whiskey. We thought you were friends, he says, but many of your people deceived us. He does not raise his voice. Instead, he poses questions that unmake the missionary's certainty. If there is but one true religion, why are the white people divided into so many churches? If the sacred book contains all truth, why was it not given to the red people with the understanding to read it? If the Creator meant this message for all, why did he not give it to both peoples at the same time? The questions are delivered not as defiance, but as reason. They strike at the roots of monopoly and at the missionary's claim to sole knowledge of divine will. The interpreter repeats the words. The minister listens, expression tightening. He begins to realize that the orator has turned the conversation from theology to sovereignty. Red Jacket moves next to the heart of the matter. We do not deny your religion, he says, but we choose to follow the path our fathers received. You say you are right and we are lost. How do you know this to be true? He points out that the white man's religion has not made his people better toward their neighbors. Wars among Christian nations are proof enough that doctrine does not always breed peace. Outside wind rustles through the oaks along the creek. Inside the air is thick with fire smoke and thought. The chiefs sit motionless as the reply lengthens. Red Jacket speaks of the Great Spirit who made both peoples distinct and gave each their own way to worship. If you believe your religion is good, he says, then we believe that ours is also good. The Great Spirit has given us both a path, and it would be unjust to make us abandon ours. The speech builds with balance and restraint. He offers a polite condition. Let the minister return to his people and reform them first. We will wait to see if your teaching makes them honest and kind. Only when that happens, he says, will the Seneca consider his request again. The logic is irrefutable. Within the council's moral framework, change must prove itself through conduct, not through promises. As the words conclude, a murmur passes around the room. The chiefs nod slowly. The interpreter finishes the translation. The minister looks down, perhaps shaken, that courtesy can conceal such strength. He has encountered not ignorance, but disciplined rhetoric. The council ends the session for the day. That night, campfires along the creek glow through thin smoke. Men and women discuss what was said. Some admire Red Jacket's courage, others worry that rejecting missionaries might cost material aid. The tension is not between faiths alone, but between ways of governing change. Each village must decide how to live within shrinking borders without surrendering its dignity. Over the next days, the meeting continues. The minister repeats his proposal, offering to build a small house and teach by example. The chiefs answer through interpreters that their decision stands. They have a religion of their own. They will not abandon it. Later accounts record that when the session closed, the missionary refused to take Red Jacket's hand, calling his words the work of Satan. Whether that detail is exact or colored by retelling the refusal marks the cultural boundary that both men could see, but only one could cross. In the end, the mission does not begin. The Seneca keep their ground for a while longer. The speech circulates in letters and newspapers retold by travelers and reformers alike. Some quote it as evidence of eloquence, others as stubborn resistance. For the Seneca, it is a public assertion of equal standing before the Creator. For the missionary world, it is an unsettling reminder that persuasion can meet an answer more powerful than force. Years later, the exchange will still echo in American memory. The words of that morning at Buffalo Creek become a record of how an orator stopped a mission, not by shouting, but by reasoning through the claim of faith itself and turning it back toward respect. The confrontation at Buffalo Creek follows a path of procedure rather than arms. The minister arrives with letters. The council assembles by agreed custom. The interpreter stands between worlds. Each step has weight because each step defines who holds authority on Seneca land. The minister asks to plant a mission. The council answers that any permanent teacher must secure consent. The exchange unfolds over several sittings broken by meals and by walks along the creek, where small knots of men speak softly out of earshot. Nothing here is rushed. Delay is not evasion. Delay is jurisdiction exercised in plain view. The council dictates the order of business. Visitors speak first so that their request is clear and on the record. The chiefs then consult. They do so in their language and in private. The interpreter remains at a distance until called. When the chiefs are ready, a single voice delivers the decision. The minister finds this unfamiliar. He is used to committees that debate aloud and to votes that break along party lines. Here the aim is unity before speech. A divided statement carries danger. A united answer carries force. The minister frames his proposal as moral rescue. He promises industry temperance and salvation. He suggests that a mission school will make boys into farmers and girls into good wives. He speaks of the blessings of reading and of the comfort of hymns. He does not intend insult. Yet his words land within a field of recent memory. The chiefs can name farms lost after well-meant partnerships. They can name children taught to scorn their elders. The minister hears objections as delay. The chiefs hear promises as prelude to loss. The procedural core tightens. The council requires terms in plain language. Will the missionary submit to council directives on hours, movement, and conduct? Will he refrain from urging people to abandon ceremonies? Will he sell no liquor? Will he keep the peace? The questions are not theological. They are administrative. The minister answers that conscience binds him to teach as he understands truth. He cannot vow to silence on matters of worship. He can promise temperance and kindness. He cannot promise to leave ritual untouched. The chiefs mark this boundary with care. A mission that places a second authority above the council is not a school. It is a rival government in a single street. Red Jacket holds the line through rhetoric that sounds gentle and reads like firm policy. He recognizes the right of the visitor to his religion. He insists on the right of the nation to its own. He separates civil peace from conversion. He will not permit the second to endanger the first. When the minister presses again, Red Jacket brings the matter to a test that is easy to understand. Reform at home must precede experiments abroad. He points to quarrels among churches and to the presence of rum traders who carry Bibles beside kegs. The council is not obliged to solve contradictions the visitor will not solve among his own. A short record is entered by a clerk attached to the agency. It notes that the council did not assent. It does not record every line. It does not need to. In this setting, the absence of consent is decisive. The minister cannot build without it. He can visit, he can preach by invitation. He cannot found a station and claim permanent footing. The season turns. The harvest demands attention. The council prefers to close the matter before winter, when travel grows hard and small disputes flare in cold rooms. The enforcement sequence is quiet. There are no patrols and no arrests. There is instead a practice of watchfulness. Community leaders make it known that any house that shelters a resident preacher without council leave risks censure. This is not collective punishment. It is a reminder that authority is held in common and exercised for order. If a sermon is announced without permission, men arrive in pairs and listen. They do not interrupt. Afterward, they inform the visitor that no further meetings will be held until the council grants leave. If a school opens informally, mothers withdraw children. If gifts are offered to draw a small congregation, the council speaks to those families in private and asks them to weigh what the gifts will cost. The minister still hopes for an accommodation. He requests a smaller aim. He asks to remain as a guest through the winter to teach a few families, and to model improvement by planting a garden and keeping a neat house. The council considers and declines. A seasonal stay can become a claim of residence. A modest garden can become an argument that the man belongs by labor. The chiefs decide that kindness is not the same as consent. They will share food and trade. They will not grant the foothold that leads to disputes in the spring. Two brief documents capture the tone of the parting weeks. The first is a missionary note that compresses frustration into judgment. Missionary account, letter, Buffalo Creek, New York, 1805. I offered peace and the arts of life, yet my hand was refused at the close, for they called light darkness and put darkness for light. My spirit is heavy. I turn homeward only for a season. The second is a memorandum that fixes the council's position without flourish. Council Clerk, Memorandum, Buffalo Creek, New York, 1805. The request to settle as a religious teacher is not granted. The nation has a way of worship. Visitors may speak by leave. No house shall be built for a mission within our ground unless the council consents. There is a small dispute that later writers will amplify. One version reports that the minister refused Red Jacket's hand in anger and called his words of the devil. Another version softens the ending to a stiff and silent parting. The record cannot settle the gesture beyond doubt. The substance does not change. The mission does not begin. In this narrative, that note is flagged as contested, while the decision is firm. Across the seasons, the effects are tangible. The winter passes without a new bell calling people to prayer at dawn. Spring returns with planting and familiar rhythms. The council arranges for a blacksmith visit and for tools through existing channels. Those who wanted the school feel disappointment. Those who feared division feel relief. Trade continues at nearby posts. A few families still attend occasional services off reservation land, then return home. The absence of a resident preacher prevents the formation of a separate community that would answer to a church board rather than to the council. The minister's supporters in distant towns write memorials. They frame the refusal as evidence of hardness of heart and plead for more funds to try again. The council hears of these papers through traders and interpreters. The chiefs do not reply in print. They do not need to argue with distant readers. They need only to keep faith with the decision they made before their people. Their legitimacy rests not on pamphlets, but on order kept in daily life. By summer, another visitor arrives with similar hopes, but a more flexible plan. He proposes instruction in plowing and spinning with no preaching at first. The council listens and asks the same questions about authority. The visitor agrees to submit to council rules and to avoid attacking ceremonies. He is allowed a short stay to demonstrate work and to leave. The contrast is clear. The nation is not closed to all outside knowledge. It is closed to programs that displace governance and scorn tradition. This policy path does not reject change. It regulates change to prevent fracture. In larger context, this confrontation fits a wider pattern. Federal words speak of civilization through voluntary means, while state markets and private speculators continue to narrow land. A mission could have functioned as a channel for further pressure, even if no coercion was intended. The council acts with that awareness. It uses the only tools that do not invite a clash of force. It uses speech procedure and the steady practice of consent withheld. The minister leaves with a sense of failure. Red Jacket leaves the house with a sense of duty done. Neither man is converted to the other's view. Yet the immediate outcome is stability. No riot occurs, no arrest is recorded. In a decade crowded with removals and wars elsewhere, the ability to draw a hard line without violence stands out. The method is simple. Fix time and place. Hear the request. Deliberate in private. Answer in one voice. Enforce the answer through custom rather than spectacle. Hold to it across seasons. One more short line belongs here because it captures the quiet intent of the council in the register of an after-action note. Headman, note, Buffalo Creek, New York, 1805. We did not quarrel. We kept our fire. We said no. The campaign at Buffalo Creek is therefore a campaign of words. It moves from petition to deliberation to refusal to maintenance. Its logistics are meetings and meals. Its choke points are moments when a guest becomes a settler, and when instruction becomes rule. Its casualties are avoided for now. Its gain is time. Time to decide how to teach children without losing elders. Time to accept what is useful and to refuse what dissolves the council. The confrontation ends not with a treaty or a charge, but with a practiced performance of sovereignty in a small room beside a narrow creek. The turning point comes when procedure and rhetoric meet in one exchange. The minister's objective is fixed. He seeks standing permission to remain at Buffalo Creek as a resident missionary to teach daily and to gather a congregation. His constraints are practical and moral. He carries limited funds, depends on hospitality, and is bound by conscience to preach what he calls the only true way. The council's objective is equally clear. It intends to keep order to protect ceremonies and to hold jurisdiction over teachers on Seneca ground. Its constraints are the pressure of shrinking land, the lure of material aid, and the need to preserve unity among households who disagree about the pace of change. The room is full when Red Jacket answers for the last time. His voice stays calm. He reviews the ground already covered so that the decision will be understood as reason rather than anger. He accepts that the minister believes his message to be good. He denies that belief alone can grant him authority to settle. He returns to the measure that matters most to the council. Who governs if disputes arise? He states that the nation has a way of worship given by the Creator, and that consent is required before any other order is introduced. Then he sets a condition that cannot be met at once and therefore turns the moment. Reform your own people first. When we see them agree among themselves and live better toward their neighbors, come back and we will hear you again. The words do not slam the door. They place the door beyond immediate reach. The effect is immediate. The initiative shifts from the visitor to the council. The minister cannot claim delay as consent. He cannot claim a foothold by wintering over. He cannot claim a moral victory by dividing families with a small informal school. The council has defined the terms of future contact and anchored them to evidence of conduct beyond Seneca land. The meeting ends with the nation in control of its calendar. No bell will be heard at dawn. No station will be built. A short admission against interest fixes how the missionary frame collides with the decision. Missionary account, last journal, near Buffalo Creek, New York, 1805. I see now that our divisions among ourselves have armed them with our own weapons. They ask for fruits, and we offer words. Until we are one, they will not receive us. And I cannot say they are unjust in this. The quote does not concede theology. It concedes tactics and timing. It acknowledges that the internal quarrels of churches visible even in frontier towns undercut the claim to a single path. It is precisely the point Red Jacket pressed. It is also the pivot that ends bargaining. The minister can no longer say that refusal is mere stubbornness. He must admit that the test Red Jacket set has weight in his own terms. Evidence invites a counterfactual. Had the council granted a seasonal permission, the minister might have raised a small flock by spring. Those families would have been tied to a board in a distant town as much as to the council at home. A schoolhouse could have become a center of separate authority with conflicts appealed outward rather than inward. Strains that later erupted over missions and land sales may have reached Buffalo Creek sooner and with less capacity to manage them. Conversely, if the minister's society had presented a strictly secular instructor bound to council rules with no preaching for a set term, the decision might have been different. The council had already shown a willingness to test practical instruction when governance was respected. The human cost of the turning point does not lie in blood. It lies in the friction of kin pulled by different hopes. A few families who wanted English schools feel disappointment and say so at night when talk runs long. A few men who sought the authority of a church to restrain drink and disorder feel let down. Children who might have learned to read that winter in a mission class will learn later at a place the council approves. Women who feared that a mission would call their daughters away from elders breathe easier. The council understands that any decision creates losers for a season. It accepts that price to avoid a deeper fracture. The turning point also clarifies the lines drawn in P2. Treaties promised annuities and reserved land. Markets and speculation pressed from the edges. Missionary boards, often independent of government, arrived, carrying the language of improvement and the habits of command. Handsome Lake's Code offered an internal program that addressed alcohol and violence without surrendering ceremony. Red Jacket's reply synthesizes those structural forces into policy. Accept what is useful on terms that maintain the council. Decline what introduces a second government within the nation. Keep the door open to future reconsideration when outside conduct proves itself by peacemaking at home. In the days after the decision, the minister attempts a small maneuver. He offers to teach a handful of children in a private house by invitation only with no formal sign of a station. The chiefs answer that private houses remain within the nation and within council scope. They remind those households that decisions about instruction by resident outsiders are communal because the effects are communal. No enforcement officer appears. Instead, uncles and head women talk to families about the consequences they have already seen in other places. The small class does not form. The weather turns. Leaves go brown along the creek. The minister writes that he will return to his society and seek guidance. He does not claim victory. He does not pretend that he was misunderstood. He names the orator's questions as the chief obstacles and notes their power. The council records only that consent was not granted and that any visitor who wishes to speak may ask leave at a proper time. The turning point at Buffalo Creek is therefore a moment where a rhetorical structure carries legal effect. Question by question, Red Jacket removes the claim of moral emergency that would justify bypassing local authority. He replaces it with a standard of proof that the visitor cannot meet and that the council has no duty to supply. The strategy is narrow and careful. It does not insult the faith of the other. It does not boast of victory. It draws a boundary in terms the visitor must respect to keep his own story intact. That is why the outcome holds beyond the day. It aligns belief with governance and turns a proposal into a test the proposer must pass elsewhere. In a time when many communities lost ground to plans presented as help, the Seneca held their ground for a season through a sentence. The nation keeps time by its own fire a little longer. The decision at Buffalo Creek in 1805 did not end the matter. It set a standard that later encounters would test. In the years that followed, law and administration pressed on the Seneca from several directions. The Treaty of Canandaigua of 1794 had recognized defined reservations and pledged that the United States would not disturb the Six Nations in the free use and enjoyment of those lands until they chose to sell. That promise shaped Seneca arguments for half a century and provided a baseline when councils weighed requests from missionaries and agents. It placed consent at the center of any change. Mission work did not cease after the 1805 refusal. Societies continued to send visitors and teachers. Some were met courteously and declined. Others stayed a season under tight conditions and departed. A record of this pattern appears in later accounts of the Seneca mission effort. There were renewed approaches around 1811 and again in the 1820s under reorganized boards. Suspicion remained high that a station could become a channel for land loss. When a missionary arrived in 1811 to open work at Buffalo Creek, chiefs heard him and refused, stating that they feared a plan to secure their land through influence. The refusal echoed the logic of the 1805 reply. Administration changed its routes, but not its pressure. The Second Treaty of Buffalo Creek in 1838 joined that pressure to removal policy. Drafted under the Indian removal era and proclaimed in 1840, it envisioned the cession of the 4 remaining Seneca reservations and relocation west. Opposition within Seneca communities and among Quaker allies challenged the treaty's fairness and the methods by which signatures were obtained. The controversy led to another instrument in 1842 that adjusted the outcome. The 1842 agreement, concluded again at Buffalo Creek, confirmed the sale of Buffalo Creek and Tonawanda to the Ogden Land Company while securing Cattaraugus and Allegheny for the Seneca. Even in success, the nation lost the ground where the 1805 Council had spoken. The legal paper trail from this period is thick with transactions and petitions that show how land companies worked alongside formal treaties. Correspondence survives between Ogden agents and local intermediaries describing payments inducements and continuing efforts to dissolve remaining reservations. These letters are not the whole story, but they reveal a machinery of removal that operated through councils, courts, and contracts rather than tents and drums. The Seneca fought it in each forum available to them and did not always prevail. Within this shifting frame mission, history took a new turn. Asher Wright and his wife Laura arrived in the 1830s and made deep study of the Seneca language. Their work produced primer scripture translations and a small press that printed in Seneca. The press issued tracts such as Nejagutenbugi Agizgwatha, and later moved when Buffalo Creek was given up. Whether one approves of their purpose or not, the material record shows a serious linguistic effort and a print culture in Seneca that outlasted the Buffalo Creek station. The Seneca memory of this period holds both the injury of dispossession and the utility of tools shaped to their own tongue. Demography and health followed the map. When families were pushed from Buffalo Creek to Cattaraugus and Allegheny, mortality rose in some seasons, and births followed the pause and recovery that relocation often imposes. The nation reorganized households, rebuilt fields, and reestablished seasonal movements within smaller limits. The policy of allotment would come later in other regions, but New York's peculiar mixture of state sales, private preemption rights, and federal treaties created its own sequence of fragmentation. The cost was measured in shortened walks between kin and longer rides to councils that once could be reached on foot. Documentary traces of this cost include petitions from headmen and women seeking redress and careful lists of households made by missionaries for their boards. They are uneven records, but they show a people counting itself against loss. Cultural continuance did not end with the fall of Buffalo Creek. The teachings of Handsome Lake, first given in 1799 and recited for years after his death in 1815, provided a moral code that condemned alcohol-defended families and sanctioned ceremonies. The code gave councils an internal structure to guide reform without surrendering governance. It continued to be recited at midwinter festivals across reservations in New York and Ontario, anchoring practice in a yearly rhythm that no outside bell could replace. The persistence of that recitation is itself a record of endurance. Memory of the 1805 reply carried forward in two ways. In missionary circles, the speech became a specimen text of native eloquence and of resistance. Some later printings repeated the detail that the visitor refused Red Jacket's hand and declared no fellowship could exist between the religion of God and the works of the devil. Whether or not every gesture is recorded precisely, the account captures the degree to which the council's polite refusal struck at mission theory. In Seneca communities, the speech served as a precedent for the principle that instruction must not displace authority, and that consent governs religious life. Both streams of memory shaped later negotiations. History matters. Present-day continuance is visible in institutions that join law and culture. The Seneca Nation maintains government and community programs at Cattaraugus and Allegheny and affirms identity through services enterprises and cultural departments. A dedicated language program works to stabilize and grow Seneca across generations through classes, immersion, and community events. These efforts are contemporary answers to the same questions asked in 1805 about who sets the hours of instruction and for whose benefit. The form is modern, but the premise remains the same. Consent and governance belong to the nation. The administrative themes that followed the 1805 refusal can be stated plainly. Arrests and trials were not the principal instruments here. Transfers were. They were executed through treaties that combined federal action with private preemption and state policy. Reservation boundaries changed by indenture and proclamation as much as by force. Annuities promised in 1794 continued to figure in councils even as their delivery was braided to the presence of agents and teachers. Schools were built and moved sometimes with council leave and sometimes under dispute. Land and resource control shifted from woodlot and stream to titles and mills, and with it came new arguments about access grazing and rights of way. Demography bent under the weight of removal and then steadied as communities rebuilt. Through it all, ceremonies were held, language was spoken, and the memory of a speech at Buffalo Creek supplied a lawful shape to refusal. If a single line joins these decades, it is that consent did not vanish when land did. The council's power to say yes or no moved with the people from Buffalo Creek to Cattaraugus and Allegheny. In later commemorations of the 1842 treaty, Seneca leaders explained that securing present territories was a partial victory against the designs of land companies. The territory is smaller. The principle is intact. It is why the 1805 exchange still matters in the archive and in the present tense. Scholars generally place the Buffalo Creek reply of 1805 among the clearest early statements of indigenous religious sovereignty in the United States. They note how Red Jacket framed religion as a matter of national jurisdiction as well as personal belief. The core claim is stable. A people holds the right to govern worship within its own order and may refuse resident missions that would displace council authority. In this reading, the speech is not only eloquence, it is policy rendered in careful prose and procedure. There is broad agreement on the setting and the effect of the day itself. A minister sought leave to found a mission. The Seneca Council heard him and said no. The refusal rested on consent, and on a test the visitor could not meet. Reform at home first, only then return and ask again. Historians also agree that the exchange became a reference point in later negotiations over schools and teachers on Seneca land, and that it traveled widely in print as an example of native oratory and diplomacy. Contested points remain at the level of text and reach. Surviving versions of the speech vary in phrasing because the words passed through interpreters and then through printers who shaped style to their readers. The vivid detail of a refused handshake appears in some later accounts and not in others. The long-range impact is also debated. Some argue that the reply delayed mission work only for a season and that later stations rose despite the precedent. Others counter that the standards set at Buffalo Creek continued to structure negotiations and protected council jurisdiction even as land shrank under separate pressures. The enduring legacy lies in three linked threads. First is doctrine. The reply fixes consent as the rule for religious instruction on native land and treats refusal as lawful governance rather than hostility. Second is method. The council used speech procedure and unity to draw a hard boundary without force, and so offered a repeatable model for communities facing intrusive reform. Third is memory. The episode became part of Seneca political culture and entered wider American memory as a moment when an indigenous nation spoke for itself in the language of reason and reciprocity. In the longer arc, the 1805 exchange sits beside treaties and removals as a counterpoint that shows another path was taken when it could be. It is cited because it fuses dignity with clarity and because it ties belief to self-government in a single room beside a small creek. The event endures in memory because a nation defended its jurisdiction by words and made consent the decisive line. In the end, at Buffalo Creek in 1805, a nation drew a boundary with words alone. Does "we will wait, reform your own people first" still stand as a principle today? What made the speech persuasive to you? Reason, history, or respectful tone? If you were on the council, how would you have voted? Tell us below. Thanks for watching.